what is the VALPRO Path project? The VALPRO Path project is a Horizon project spanning 4 years from September 2022 until August of 2026. We are 22 partners from 9 countries developing fresh possibilities, validating and showcasing ways to enhance plant protein production for food and feed in the EU. Our crops that we are working on are in our interest are lupin, soybean, chickpea, lentil pea, and faba bean. We have our innovation production systems, or we call them living labs, that are located in Germany, Ireland, Italy, Portugal, and Denmark, where we conduct our research and continue the work of the project. Our main goal is driving economic growth and societal welfare in line with the European Green Deal. Our speakers for today are Amy O'Leary. Amy graduated from Trinity College in Dublin, the University de Montpellier and University de Barcelona with her master's in global challenges for sustainability last year and has a BA in European Studies. Her research focuses currently includes plant protein policies and transition pathways. Our second speaker will be Amanda Sithole. Amanda is a Welsh scholar based in Cork University Business School, University College of UCC, supervised by Dr. Seamus O'Reilly and Professor Maeve Henshin from Teagasc. Her research explores sustainable pathways and integrates innovative systems that support Ireland's transition to plant-based protein production and consumption that can be forward be used in the EU. From this, what can we expect from the webinar? In-depth exploration of European plant-based protein traditions featuring new research on scenario planning, value chain mapping, and key insights from the VALPRO Path project. Expert speakers will share opportunities, challenges, and actionable findings gathered from workshops with industry, farmers, and researchers, and from the project. And the session will conclude with an engaging discussion and the Q&A session that we urge at any questions that might come up. You have a button down citing Q&A that you can put in your questions, and we will answer at the end of the webinar. From this point, I will like to give the word to one of our project coordinators, Dr. Richard Lynch, who will give a couple of minute brief, more in-depth view of the VALPRO Path project. Richard, are you with us?
How you doing, Jason? Okay, thank you very much, Jason, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone, and we're very happy to have you here on the VALPRO Path webinar. As Jason said, it's one webinar in a series of webinars for the Horizon Europe funded project VALPRO Path. And this webinar will focus on transition pathways, so how we bring the stakeholders along on the protein transition. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you just confirm, Jason, is my screen sharing there with a slide
Yes,
with VALPRO Path
we can
project?
see your whole right now presentation. You can enter
Perfect.
in your sharing mode so it doesn't.
Okay, perfect. So just for those of you that are new, apologies, 1 second while it moves over. For those of you that might be new to the project, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview in about 3 to 4 minutes of the project itself. So the core of the project VALPRO Path, which we said was funded by Horizon Europe, was to demonstrate the potential of a select number of protein crops for added value pathways in Europe. So I suppose in terms of that context of the overall objective, we had 3 core aims of the project. The first aim, I suppose, was to develop or to have a look at those varieties of protein crops that are currently being grown in Europe and to evaluate and test whether or not more suitable varieties could be grown in specific regions, paleoclimatic regions across Europe, for not just feed use, but also for food use. So in itself, that was novel that the crops that we were growing and testing, we evaluated the nutritional composition of these crops as well in terms of protein, fat, ash, and carbohydrate content. Those crops then were fed through our further work packages to have a look at if we could apply some novel or interesting processing approaches from food technologies that are out there to see if we can develop some high value or high end ingredients for the food sector. And with those ingredients, then our aim was to develop end applications for those. So some of the applications we looked at were breads, confectionery, pastas, some beverages as well, all made with the legume crops which we were growing within the project and the different varieties we tested. And then I suppose a final objective or core aim of the project was to make sure that once we developed these sustainable business models, we had a look to make sure that number one, they stood up in terms of their economic and environmental performance through LCA analysis. We also ran some business modeling work on each of these case studies. And with this, we hoped that we would give confidence to stakeholders to take up some of these technologies and introduce themselves into this protein transition in Europe. So in terms of the project itself, it's, as Dusan said, it's a 4-year project. It began in 2022. We're now entering the final year of our project. And really a core focus of this is to develop what we have this webinar for today, these transition pathways. The idea is to bring all stakeholders, all of the actors along in the value chain on this journey to make sure that they're both given confidence and are encouraged to take up the technologies and to make sure that they both implement them and they maintain this approach to transition towards plant-based proteins in Europe. So we're very thankful for 2 speakers giving us time to present today. And with that, I'd just like to give the floor to our first speaker, Amy from Teagasc.
My name's Amy O'Leary. I'm a research officer in Teagasc and I work on VALPRO Path, more the social science side. So today I'm going to talk about scenario planning and transition pathways for plant protein, but also foresight as an approach to creating these transition pathways. So going into what foresight and future studies is, these are systematic approaches to thinking about the future and exploring factors that could give rise to possible and probable future characteristics, events, and behaviors. It's also described as the disciplined analysis of alternative futures. And in this Farmers of the Future report, which inspired our workshops a lot, it talks about it being a systematic, participatory, and inclusive way of kind of strategic planning. So we used foresight as a way of zooming out, looking at the kind of wider food system, and to look at transition pathways from that point of view. To just go further into kind of the steps of the foresight process that was involved in thinking about what kind of a workshop we wanted to set up. So we already mentioned what is future studies. There are different types of futures methods. So forecasting is often related to the analysis of trends, but in VALPRO Path we're kind of not looking at trends and trying to predict the future. We're trying to break the trend and have more of an inductive approach and kind of a wider idea of what the future could be. So we're more looking at foresight. You might also think about types of futures. So the workshop that we did concerned plausible futures, and we chose this type of future to think about because our stakeholder network, our consortium, they're experts in their field and in plant protein, and they have a lot of direct interaction with farmers and industry, so they can speak to what a plausible future might look like. But also we are thinking about doing a workshop that might involve a preferable future in the new year. We might also talk about our relationship with the future. So preactive, inactive, and reactive relationships with the future kind of imply a linear type take on it, where there's one future and we're working up to it, but we are trying to take an interactive view where we're kind of creating our own future in the present. These authors talk about different stages of futures work and foresight work, but they all kind of include some sort of an input stage, prioritization of certain scenarios in a strategy phase. But what we're more kind of concerned about today is the specific activities that you can do to as part of a foresight study. There are so many that you could include at all the different foresight stages, but we decided to do a scenario planning activity. It is often associated with plausible futures, and we did a workshop in Turin this year at our AGM with our consortium partners. So again, why are we doing foresight in VALPRO Path? Foresight can be used for inquiry and for change. So the project aims to generate knowledge on how value can be added to plant protein, but also we want to provide insights for policymakers to act on this knowledge. So that's the change piece. And ultimately, we want to have a type of roadmap, a zoomed out roadmap for the applied knowledge and technologies of the project. So here's a little snapshot of the workshop that we did. We used the scenario matrix method, and this is a very commonly used method in scenario planning. And it involves selecting food systems drivers and using that to build a matrix that I'll show you in a second. So we sent a survey out to our consortium partners and asked them to rate different food systems drivers according to highest levels of uncertainty or importance. And that gave us the axes for this matrix. And although there are these axes, and but it's important to stress that it's not maths, it's a basic separation device to facilitate discussions surrounding a possible future, or a plausible future in this case. And what happened is we had 4 groups at the workshop, and each group discussed a different scenario. So just taking scenario 1 here, so this group looked at a potential future that would have continued increase in animal protein consumption, but also that the food system would be resilient against crisis and conflict. So the discussion was about what plant protein would look like and what our project results would look like in this scenario. So I'm just going to go a bit more into this scenario 1, because there are obviously the 4 different ones, but the participants did a lot of detail on each one. But just to give you an idea of what was coming out of the workshop. So we asked the participants 4 different questions to facilitate discussion surrounding the scenarios. So the first thing we asked them to do was to describe other food system drivers in the scenario. So we're talking about what does the population look like? How does climate affect it? Technology, this kind of thing. And most groups talked about increased population, but also this group talked about potentially having to meet different dietary requirements in the scenario, like where there's increased animal protein consumption, maybe halal meat could be something that is going to be more in demand because of migration potentially, or how else are we going to meet protein demand, animal protein demand? Is it going to be with traditional farmed meat, or is it going to be cultured meat? Is it going to be a technological solution? So that was the kind of other food systems drivers that we were using to kind of start to describe the scenario. Then we asked about VALPRO Path results in this scenario. So obviously we're trying to meet protein demand in the scenario, but there's going to be increased overall food demand, and maybe VALPRO Path results, the plant proteins that are developed, and are they going to have a role in just meeting general food demand because of increased population? They also talked about in this group how the methodologies that we use in VALPRO Path might also be applicable to like animal protein. So we have a nutrient tracking tool that could be used. We do LCA analyses, that methodology could be used, but also the results of these can be used to make plant protein seem more competitive in this kind of more competitive scenario, because there's more demand for animal protein. Then we asked about gaps. So what gaps were our results not filling? And VALPRO Path has more of a plant protein for food approach. So this group kind of mentioned that maybe the feed question was still open, and that we weren't talking about that. And if we're not adding value to protein by making the plant protein ready for food markets, how are we going to add value to the plant protein? And they mentioned biofuels potentially being important in this scenario, and to also that it would still be important to increase the quality of feed and not just use what we've always used. So that was one gap, and another gap was that they identified was hybrid solutions, that in this scenario with increased animal protein, maybe we would still have to keep emissions down with the animal protein products. Maybe there could be hybrid products. Maybe there could be burgers that have their protein content met with plant protein. So you're having meat and plant protein in the burger, but it has less emissions because there's plant protein in it. So it's a different way of thinking about applying the results of our project, depending on what the future looks like. Then finally, we asked about policy measures to address these gaps. And the group talked about protecting farmers, specifically farmers who are growing lower value feed, because that food market, because they mightn't have as much access to plant protein for food market, but also those that are growing plant protein for food have increased competition. So they would need greater support from policymakers. And they also suggested how strategy and like an overarching strategy would be important, because how can a food system be resilient in this scenario? And there would have to be some level of coordination on a policy level with a kind of overarching strategy. So finally, the final question we asked them was to name the scenario. This was interesting because we got more of a sense of their what they ultimately thought about the scenario, and they called it a short-term utopia, because they obviously had kind of a negative view of it, that maybe it wasn't gonna, or probably wouldn't be something that would be sustainable. And also they, in describing that name, they talked about how there mightn't be consumer choice. There wouldn't be as much consumer choice. So to meet demands for consumer choice, there'd have to be plant protein ultimately as an option. So how do we integrate these types of this work into VALPRO Path project results? The foresight work and the using it to describe transition pathways is ultimately a communication tool. How can we situate project results in an overarching, in the kind of wider food system? And we want to be able to communicate project results to policymakers. So that's kind of the function of those of that workshop and the results that are coming out of it. And we're going to have another workshop in the new year talking about maybe a priority scenario, preferable future that we want to work toward. And we'd be doing a backcasting exercise, as it's called, where you work backwards to a certain type of future. So keep an eye on, probably our LinkedIn is the best place to get our project results. project news, because we're looking for participants. It's probably going to be in Brussels. So just to leave you with that, there's a lot of different ways of describing transition pathways. This was a way of looking at the wider food system. We also have people in our project looking at more specific business cases, and that's a kind of other way of describing a more specific pathway. And then Amanda is going to talk about transition pathways, but more the processes underpinning them. So that's all from me. There's a lovely picture of our consortium after the workshop, and looking forward to your questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. Now, our next presentation is Amanda. Amanda, you can share your presentation and continue.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda. I'm a final year PhD student, supervised by Dr. Seamus O'Reilly in UCC and Professor Maeve Hanshin. And following on such an informative presentation by Amy on foresight's approach, I'll be presenting our current study that is titled Transforming Plant Protein Value Chains, the Socio-Technical Innovations in Transition Pathways. So to start off my presentation, I'll give a brief introduction on the Protein Eye project. So this project aims to develop strategies to maximize sustainable plant protein production and consumption within the island of Ireland for human food purposes. And the project is a multidisciplinary project that takes a food systems approach and involves 7 research tasks, so from crop production through to human health. And the work that we'll be presenting today sits within task 3 of the project, which focuses on rural development and sustainable development. And the Plant Protein Project works in close proximity with projects such as the VALPRO Path project that aims to address the EU's mandates to diversify protein sources. So to give a brief background of our study, so as you might already know that can you still see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, I'm having technical issues here. I'll share again. Sorry. Okay, I'll carry on. Sorry. So to introduce the research topic, to give a bit of background, is that the current food system is central to global challenges, which are economical, social, and environmental challenge that is amplified by the growing human population that is expected to reach to 10 billion by 2030. And plant proteins offer a promising pathway towards the sustainability. However, this requires a systems transformation change. And this is not just about producing more products or product development, but it's all about transferring or transforming of the entire system, its technologies, the policies, and the supply chain infrastructure, and how we think about food. And research innovation programs, they drive this change within food systems. However, there's a gap or knowledge gap in literature where we don't fully understand how these projects, or specifically focusing on publicly funded projects, how they actually drive this change. So while our study looks at our Ireland's food system as a study case where this country is quite deeply rooted in its agricultural production, with a strong dairy and meat industry with specific climate and soil soil conditions, we believe that the mechanisms of change, understanding how publicly funded projects and how new systems interact with established systems and what patterns merge are all universal insights. So to analyze or to understand our project, our aim is to analyze how publicly funded projects shape the development of plant protein innovations, not just theory, but in practice. And also what we want to understand is when EU invest in plant protein research, what happens and how do these innovations interact and potentially change the current food system. So how transition pathways merge. To understand what happens, we need the right analytical tools. So think of these as our lenses to make sense of the complex system. So we integrated several complementary frameworks to understand how transformations occur or how transition pathways actually emerge. So firstly, we used the multi-level perspective framework, and this kind of helps us to see the big picture, how small innovations interact with established systems and the broader societal changes. And I'll explain this framework, how we apply this framework on our next slide. And then we used the strategic niche management framework, and this then zooms into early stages of technology or early stages of grassroots innovations, how they gain momentum, how do they build credibility and support, and what helps them to break through from labs or pilots into the mainstream markets. And thirdly, we used the value chain approach, specifically looking at the value chain mapping, and this approach helped us to identify the key players, the researchers to farmers, to merchants and processors, and what bottlenecks exist within the value chain and what opportunities are there. And our framework is all it incorporates systems thinking, the principles of systems thinking, and this encourages us to see or have a holistic view, recognizing the innovations, the actors, the processes, and their interaction between the interactions between the influence of the non-linear way. So together, these frameworks let us trace not what's happening in plant proteins, but also how and why these transitions occur. So moving on to our next slide on how we understand how transitions happen, we use the MLP framework. So how the MLP framework describes change is that it looks at 3 levels. So the first level, which is referred to as the social technical level, this is the dominant or external factors that puts pressures on the existing, on the middle level, which is referred to as the social technical regime, which represents the current dominant food structure. So for in our study, this is where the Irish agri-food system sits. So we look at how these pressures have an influence on the regime. So when they do have an influence, let's say climate action plans or change in policies, then they create space for niche innovations, the bottom last level, which then creates space to merge and be part of or reform the current regime level. So to just give a brief on how our study design approach was, our study was done in 3 phases. So the first phase formed the foundation of our study, and this is where we mapped the Irish plant protein value chain and identified challenges as well as opportunities. And this included desk-based research as well as a stakeholder workshop. And then secondly, we zoomed into the space of publicly funded projects to see how research was addressing these challenges as well as these opportunities that were identified in phase 1. And lastly, we look at phase 3 of the project that looks at the protein transition, which includes conducting semi-structured interviews as well as workshops. So to give a results of what our work has, what our study has shown is that when it comes to key challenges that are faced in Ireland, there's first challenge is the limited availability of available seeds for food grade purposes, as well as the technical know-how gap when utilizing Irish products. So these challenges were identified by a group of stakeholders, from farmers to processors to merchants, as well as researchers. So these challenges are among other challenges. So now to give a brief of zooming in to how we utilize the strategic niche management framework. So while our data is still ongoing, I'll share the emerging themes from the study. So our emerging themes are focused on the network building, the vision and expectation, as well as knowledge and learning. So I'll explain briefly on the network building aspect of our theme. Okay. So our research reveals that experienced researchers have a strong track with building mature functioning networks with industry, and these networks are deliver real value for everyone involved. So at a farm level, researchers involved in publicly funded projects have established networks with farmers that are focused on plant protein cultivations. So what makes this powerful is that these networks are a two-way learning exchange that occurs. So researchers, they bring in the scientific agronomic sciences and best practices, and farmers provide a real-world feedback on what's actually helping on the fields. So this is not just information sharing, but it's a collaborative knowledge creation. And through this process, farmers and researchers are jointly developing expectations about what's realistic and the time frame that makes sense and what support is needed. So speaking from that example, we have another example at an industry level where these researchers have established networks with industries, and these partners, they join development when they speak about joint collaboration in developing certain products. So this forms a strong bond where industry can actually see how the core development of these products, as well as the learning process where both industry learns what's scientifically possible there, as well as how then the industry sees how will be commercially viable to produce these products. And this shapes the expectations of the product development pathway and what can be achieved, let's say, in 2 years or 5 years, and what investments are needed. So I've put this image to show how these networks create value. So this was taken in a Protein Eye farm visit where the Minister of Agriculture joined the visits. So this kind of shows that these networks are not just academic exercises. The insights that are generated within these collaborative learnings flow directly to policymakers who make decisions on the different types of funding, the regulations, and the strategic priorities. So these networks serves as an interconnected function because firstly, they generate knowledge exchange, moving expertise between researchers and industry in both direct ways, as well as collective learning, creating understanding through collaboration that no single actor could develop alone, as well as third, they kind of create a shared vision building, aligning expectations on what's possible and what's needed when it comes to the next real experience. So the key message here is that these networks are becoming key innovative platforms where industry involvement accelerates both research impact as well as commercialization success. So to conclude, to bring everything together, I'll leave two key takeaways from our research. First is the core insights from our research that developing sustainable plant protein value chains fundamentally depends on aligning niche and broader systems. So these innovations, whether it's producing new techniques, novel ingredients, do not succeed in isolation. So they need the right support, marketing conditions, as well as infrastructure for them to scale. But also what's more important is that they all need actors to work together. And secondly is that the projects like the VALPRO Path project provides central player in this transition because they're not only there for market alone, but they connect stakeholders across the value chain. They facilitate knowledge exchange between researchers as well as industries and creates collaborative spaces where actual transitions happen. So thank you, and if you have any questions.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Amy, for your presentations. They were very informative and what needs to be done for the transition to continue. We would like now to go to our next segment of the webinar, that is the QA session, where if you have any questions, you can write them down in the button below stated QA for the attendees, and we will receive it right away. All right, so Amy, based on your research, what do you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges in transitioning the protein sector in Europe?
So I think there's a huge opportunity, I kind of mentioned it in my presentation, for strategic planning, like a lot in long-term strategic plans at policy, like high-level policy. So there's obviously no European plant protein strategy yet. And there's only kind of a handful of national protein strategies. So there's this kind of gap there where strategic planning needs to happen, and exercises like these workshops to try and describe transition pathways can inform these long-term strategic plans, because it's a way of communicating to policy what needs to happen on the ground. And I've been involved in some policy analysis work where I've found that there are there's a huge need for these kind of procedural policy instruments. So yeah, that kind of strategic planning, kind of overarching strategy at high level, European policy, national policy, there we need to see more of that. There's a huge opportunity there.
Well, thank you. The next question is, based on both of your research and workshops, what do you think is the most critical factor for accelerating Europe's plant-based transition? The question is both. So, Amanda, would you like to start?
Yes. So from our study, what has shown is that collaboration between actors is quite a key thing when it comes to the transitions. And then it's just not collaboration, but it's a systemic collaboration, if I could put it that way, where it doesn't focus on a single stage of the value chain, but addresses the entire chain. So an example of this is when we have a protein aid scheme that is focused on increasing the production of legumes at farm level, which has increased the production of legumes in Ireland. However, because at the next stage of the value chain, the processing side, because there's limited infrastructure when it comes to the processing, then these produce goes back for, oh well, first of all, these produce are for human grade, so these produce goes back to the animal feed because there isn't enough investment as yet for processing facilities.
All right, thank
So I
you.
hope that
And
answers.
Amy, could you give us your feedback on the question?
On the most critical factors.
Yes.
So I kind of mentioned the feed gap being identified by that group in scenario 1, and how our project maybe isn't focusing on that. But I think the feed question will be critical in answering, or is critical, and that we need to answer like what the place of feed is in this protein transition.
All right, and thank you, Amy, and I want to thank you, Amanda, for joining us for the VALPRO Path webinar. Again, thank you again to Richard and for Tamara for adding to the discussion. We would like to thanks to all the attendees for joining us. And if you have any more questions or you want to learn more about VALPRO Path, you can go to our website or you can contact us through our social media channels. That's VALPRO Path at LinkedIn, Twitter, or X, and Facebook. We wish you a pleasant day and to continue the great work that we're doing. Goodbye.